And this last example, for some of these, for example, A, when this one appears on your exam, they will say solve for n algebraically. What does that mean? That means you're going to have to go to your formula, and now n is part of the np2. So we have to say, well, what does np2 equal? np2 is the same as n factorial over n minus 2 factorial. And it's equal to 56. Now, algebraically, when you've got an n inside of a factorial, take a step back and say to yourself, well, what would it mean if there were numbers in there? Let's say n is 10. What would I do if I didn't have a calculator and I had 10 factorial divided by 8 factorial? How can you do that without a calculator and say, I know that this is 90? Because if you expanded it, this would be 10 times 9 times 8, and it would keep going. And on the bottom would be 8 times 7, and it would keep going. And you would cancel all of those out and be left with just 10 times 9. So now we have to use that same idea when we have n's. The first thing you have to realize is which is bigger. Is n bigger or n minus 2 bigger? N is bigger. So what we do is we always start expanding the bigger one. So if n is bigger, it would be n times what would be next? N minus 1. And then what would be next? And you keep going until you get to the number that's on the bottom. And I'm going to just go like this. Does that make sense? On the top, it's going to be n times n minus 1 times n minus 2, and it would keep going all the way down to 1. And I can show that by just putting a factorial on the n minus 2, because that means it would keep going. But I have an n minus 2 factorial on the bottom, so those now cancel out. And that changes my equation to just n times n minus 1 equals 56. What kind of equation is that? It's quadratic. How do we solve quadratic equations? Make one side equal to 0 and factor. So if I multiply this out, I'm going to get n squared minus n. If I bring the 56 to the left-hand side, I'll get n squared minus n plus or minus 56 equals 0. Does that factor? Yes, it does. And the nice thing about it factoring is if you're doing permutations, right, you're dealing with whole objects, right? It's not like how many ways can you arrange 6.5 people in a row? That doesn't come up, right? Because you can't have half a person. Or if you do, I don't know, are they still a person? If there's there's a person no longer, if they're dead, are they still a person? I don't know. Interesting things to think about. So we can factor this, and we know that it has to be nice numbers. It's going to be n minus 8, n plus 7. So our answers are n could be 8 or n could be negative 7. Now, our definition of factorials, n factorial, it only makes sense if they're whole numbers, or we have that special definition that says 0 factorial is 1. So when you get your final answers in a question that has factorials, you have to do a check, and you can never take the factorial of a negative, so that will be an extraneous root. And the only answer is going to be 8. This is the algebraic way of doing this. A guess and check way would be saying, what do I don't know about NP2? The 2 stood for the number of spaces. So if you had 2 spaces and it equaled 56 and the numbers went down by 1 each time, you might be able to just say, hey, I know that it's 8, because 8 times 7 is 56. But that wouldn't get you any marks in this question if it said solve for n algebraically. So some of them will be algebraic. And usually they'll do that with 2's, because if I had n minus 3 on the bottom, then I would get a cubic equation, and then you'd have to use your factor theorem and remainder theorem, and it would be a little bit less nice to be able to solve. Now in part B is one where it wouldn't be an algebraic solution that they would be looking for. So in that case, you have 5pr equals 20. So you need something to equals 20, and the r is the number of spaces. If I had one space, is that enough? No. 5 is not equal to 20. So you add another space. Is that enough? Yes. So r is equal to 2. So there will be some that you'll be asked to solve for them algebraically, some that you will just be able to do with a guess and check, or just using the idea of how many spaces and what number you're starting with to figure that out. So, question is, for homework, is number 10, and just 10A I want you to do algebraically. A for algebraic. The rest you can do whatever technique works for you to figure it out.